My sister-in-law made up an affair to destroy my marriage. She contacted my clients and family with detailed lies. But I sued her legally, and the judge ordered her to pay $83,000 plus a permanent restraining order she never saw coming. I'm 28 years old. I run a pretty successful business in a small town where basically everyone knows everyone. And what happened a few months ago almost destroyed my marriage, my reputation, and everything I've built. And the worst part is that it was all because of Heather, my wife, Charlotte's sister, who decided to make up a completely false story about us having an affair. Yeah, you read that right. My sister-in-law literally invented that I had cheated on my wife with her, and she did it just to ruin my life. I guess I should start from the beginning so you understand the full scope of this insanity. I met Charlotte about 6 years ago, and from the first moment, I knew she was the person I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. You know, she's one of those women who are genuinely good, thoughtful, who support you in everything. She's 25 now. And when we started dating, she was 19 and I was 22. And everything was perfect except for one small detail that at first didn't seem that important, but over time would become my worst nightmare. Her sister, Heather. From the moment I met her, Heather was always weird with me, like overly friendly in an uncomfortable way. But Charlotte told me her sister had always been like that, constantly seeking attention, causing drama over anything. Turns out that since they were kids, Heather had this jealousy thing toward Charlotte, and I don't know if it was because Charlotte was prettier or because their parents loved her more or what, but she was always competing with her, trying to overshadow her, making things up to be the center of attention. During the time Charlotte and I were dating, Heather would send me pretty inappropriate text messages, like flirty comments that made me feel super uncomfortable. And I would show them to Charlotte immediately every time it happened. But then I realized the messages were disappearing from my phone, and I didn't understand what was going on until Charlotte explained that Heather was probably deleting them remotely or something, because apparently she had done similar things before with other boyfriends of her friends. Truth is, I should have put a stop to it more firmly from that moment, but Charlotte always asked me to be patient, that she was her sister, and that eventually she would mature. Spoiler alert, she didn't mature, she only got worse. When we got married 3 years ago, everything seemed to be going well at first. We had a beautiful wedding in town, nothing too extravagant but elegant, and everyone was happy, or so I thought. On the wedding day, Heather showed up in a dress that basically looked like a wedding dress. It was white with gold details and super flashy, and she spent the entire reception trying to monopolize my time, interrupting me every time I talked to my friends or family, asking me to dance with her like 5 times. Charlotte was visibly upset but didn't want to cause a scene on our wedding day, so she basically endured the whole situation with a forced smile. My parents noticed it immediately, and my mom told me afterwards, "Be careful with that girl. Something's not right there." But I thought it was just overprotective mom paranoia. The first 2 years of marriage were peaceful, because Heather had a boyfriend and basically left us alone. But about a year and a half ago, she broke up with her boyfriend, or rather, he broke up with her because, as I found out later, she cheated on him with some guy she met at a bar, and then the real nightmare began. Heather showed up at our house crying one day, saying she had nowhere to go, that her parents were furious with her, and that she needed to stay with us just a few weeks while she found a place. Charlotte has too big a heart and of course said yes. And I, as a good husband, wasn't going to contradict my wife, although inside I was like, this is going to be a disaster. I can feel it. And I was right, because those few weeks turned into 4 months of pure hell. From the moment Heather moved into our house, she started inserting herself into everything. Literally everything. If Charlotte and I were watching a movie in the living room, she would come downstairs in pajamas and sit between us, like physically between the two of us. If I was working in my home office, she would knock on the door every 5 minutes with some silly excuse, like, could I help her with her computer? Did I have a minute to review her resume? Could I give her business advice? And the worst part is that when my work friends came over for meetings or informal dinners, Heather would show up super dressed up in super tight and low-cut clothes and would flirt shamelessly with all of them. My friend Austin, who's one of my business partners, mentioned it to me a couple of times. Like, hey man, your sister-in-law is a bit intense, isn't she? And I could only nod, embarrassed. The straw that broke the camel's back was one night about 5 months ago. It was like 2 in the morning, and I had gone down to the kitchen for water because I couldn't sleep. I had an important presentation the next day with a big client, Vincent, who's basically one of the pillars of my business. I was standing there in the dark kitchen drinking water when Heather appeared, and she was wearing basically nothing, just a super short t-shirt and underwear. And she approached me in a way that made all the alarms in my head go off. She put her hand on my chest and said something like, "I always knew you, and I had a special connection," and before I could react, she tried to kiss me. I backed away so fast I almost dropped the glass of water, and I told her very clearly, "What the hell are you doing? This is never going to happen. I'm married to your sister. What are you thinking?" She just stood there with an expression I can't describe, like half surprised, half angry, as if she really expected me to respond positively to her advance, which is absolutely insane. I told her to go to her room, immediately, and that the next day she had to find another place to live because this had gone too far. She started saying I was misinterpreting everything, that she was just being friendly, but I wasn't going to fall for that manipulation. I went up to my room, woke Charlotte up and told her exactly what had happened. Charlotte was devastated. Not just because of what her sister had tried to do, but because this confirmed all her worst fears about Heather's behavior. The next morning, Charlotte confronted Heather and told her she had a week to move out. Heather cried, begged, said I was lying, that she would never do something like that, but Charlotte knew her too well and knew I wouldn't make something like that up. Heather left the house that same day, like literally packed her bags and left in the middle of a dramatic tantrum, screaming that we would regret this, that this wasn't going to end like this, and I thought, is she threatening us? But I didn't give it much importance, because frankly, I just wanted her out of our lives. Oh, how naive I was. 2 days later, Charlotte got a call from Heather. I was at work when it happened, but Charlotte called me immediately afterwards, crying hysterically. Heather had told Charlotte that she and I had had an affair during the month she lived with us, that it had all been my idea, that I had been pursuing and manipulating her, and that she had finally given in because she felt vulnerable after her breakup. She said we had slept together multiple times, that I had told her I didn't really love Charlotte, that I was going to leave Charlotte for her. A whole completely made-up soap opera. Literally every word was an absolute lie. And the sickest part of it all is that Heather told Charlotte the reason she was confessing now was because she felt guilty and wanted to be honest with her sister. When I got home that afternoon, Charlotte was waiting for me in the living room. She saw me come in, and before I could say anything, she told me, "I need you to tell me the truth. Did anything happen between you and my sister?" And I swore to her by everything I love that no, that Heather was completely lying, that she was probably doing this as revenge because we had kicked her out of the house. Charlotte believed me immediately, and that's something I'll be eternally grateful for, because in that moment, I realized I had the best partner in the world, someone who knew me well enough to know I would never do something like that. But the relief was short-lived because then Charlotte told me that Heather had also called her parents and told them the same story, and they had believed her completely. Charlotte's parents, my in-laws, called me that same night. And when I say they called me, I mean they basically screamed at me on the phone for like 30 minutes. They told me I was a liar, a manipulator, that I had abused their younger daughter when she was in a vulnerable position, that I was a monster. I tried to explain to them that Heather was lying, that she had tried to seduce me and I had rejected her, but they didn't want to hear absolutely anything. They told me Charlotte had to leave me immediately, that if she didn't, they were going to take legal action against me. They also started saying I was controlling and abusive with Charlotte, which is completely false. Anyone who knows us knows our relationship is super healthy and balanced. Charlotte tried to talk to them, tell them she believed me, and not Heather, but they told her she was being manipulated by me, that she couldn't see the truth because she was under my control. It was surreal, like being in an alternate reality. But the worst part, the absolutely worst part, is that Heather didn't stop there. She started contacting my business friends and clients, spreading the same rumors. Austin called me one afternoon and said, "Man, I need to tell you something. Heather contacted me on Facebook and told me this whole story about you. 2 having an affair, and I told her that was complete garbage, but I thought you should know she's doing this." Turns out she hadn't only contacted Austin, but also like 5 or 6 other people from my professional circle. And then, This is what really made me explode with rage. I found out she had contacted Vincent, my most important client, the guy whose contract basically keeps my business afloat. She sent him private messages telling him I was an adulterer, a liar, that he couldn't trust me, actively trying to sabotage my professional reputation. In a small town like ours, where everyone knows everyone, these kinds of rumors spread like wildfire. Suddenly, I started noticing strange looks when I went to the supermarket, conversations that would stop when I entered places, people I had known my whole life crossing the street to avoid me. My business started being affected. Some clients started canceling meetings without explanation, others just stopped returning my calls. Charlotte and I were living an absolute nightmare, and all because of the poisonous lies of one toxic and envious person who couldn't stand to see us happy. There came a point where I realized we couldn't just ignore this and hope it would go away, because it wasn't going to go away. It was only going to get worse. So I made the decision to fight. I hired a lawyer, Attorney Reynolds, who's pretty well known in the area for handling defamation cases. I told him the whole situation from the beginning, every detail, every interaction with Heather, and then we started collecting evidence. I hired a technician to recover the text messages Heather had sent me years ago that she had deleted. And it turns out she hadn't deleted everything. We were able to recover like 15 or 20 super inappropriate messages where she basically flirted with me. And I responded with very neutral and professional things. We also reviewed the security cameras we have at the house. We had one in the hallway leading to the kitchen, and although it didn't capture the kitchen directly, it did show Heather going down to the kitchen that night wearing basically nothing, and then going back up like 10 minutes later clearly upset. Austin and 3 other of my work friends agreed to give written testimonies about how Heather had contacted them with false stories, and also about her inappropriate behavior when she lived in our house. Vincent, my client, also agreed to provide screenshots of the messages Heather had sent him trying to ruin my reputation. Basically, we built a solid case that proved not only that Heather was lying, but that she was doing it deliberately and maliciously with the specific intention of destroying me personally and professionally. Attorney Reynolds told me we had a very strong case for defamation and harassment, and that we should proceed with legal action. First, we sent a cease and desist letter to Heather, demanding that she stop spreading these lies immediately and issue a public retraction. She didn't even respond to the letter, completely ignored it, which Attorney Reynolds told me was actually a good thing for our case because it demonstrated her lack of remorse and her intention to continue with the defamation. So we proceeded with the formal lawsuit. We sued Heather for defamation, harassment, and intentional damage to my reputation and business. We asked for damages compensation that included the business losses I had experienced, emotional damages, legal costs, and we also asked for a permanent restraining order. When Charlotte's parents found out about the lawsuit, they completely lost their minds. They started calling us day and night, leaving voicemails saying we were monsters. How could we do this to a family member, that Heather was the real victim here? They tried all kinds of emotional manipulation with Charlotte, saying her sister was going to end up ruined, that she would never recover from this, that Charlotte had to convince me to drop the lawsuit. Charlotte made it very clear to them that she was completely on my side and that Heather had created this situation herself with her lies and manipulations. Her parents then started threatening us, saying that if we didn't drop the lawsuit, they were going to disinherit us, that we would never be part of the family again, as if that was some kind of incentive after everything they had done to us. One day, about 3 weeks after filing the lawsuit, Charlotte's parents just showed up at our house unannounced. Charlotte opened the door and there they were, along with Heather, all 3 standing on the porch demanding to come in. Charlotte stood firm and told them they weren't welcome, that any communication had to be through our lawyer. Her father started yelling that I had brainwashed Charlotte, that he was going to fix this himself if necessary, which sounded pretty threatening. I called the police and asked them to remove them from our property. The police arrived and explained to them that they were trespassing and that if they didn't leave, they could be arrested. They finally left. But not before Heather yelled at me from the yard that I was going to pay for this, that she was going to make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. After that incident, Charlotte and I made the decision to cut contact completely, not only with Heather, but also with her parents. We blocked their numbers, their social media profiles, everything. We told Attorney Reynolds what had happened, and he documented everything as additional evidence of harassment. My own parents, who had been super understanding and supportive throughout all this, told us we had made the right decision, that sometimes you have to walk away from toxic people, even if they're family. My mom told Charlotte, "We're your family now, and we always will be," which made Charlotte cry, but in a good way, you know. The legal process took about 4 months total. There were hearings, depositions, presentation of evidence. Heather's lawyer, who honestly I felt a bit sorry for because he had to defend the indefensible, tried to argue that Heather had been confused, that she had misinterpreted certain situations, basically trying to make it look like she hadn't intentionally lied, but had been mistaken. But when we presented all the evidence, the recovered text messages, the testimonies from multiple people, the screenshots of her attempts to contact my client Vincent with specific and detailed lies, it became very clear that this had been a calculated and malicious defamation campaign. The judge had no patience for Heather's excuses. The verdict came about a month ago. The judge ruled completely in our favor. Heather was found guilty of defamation and harassment. She was ordered to pay $83,000 in damages, which included compensation for business losses, emotional damage, and legal costs. She was also forced to issue a formal written retraction that had to be sent to all the people she had contacted with her lies, including my clients and colleagues. And best of all, the judge granted a permanent restraining order that prohibits Heather from coming within 500 feet of us, our home, or my workplace. If she violates the restraining order, she can be arrested immediately. Heather obviously doesn't have $83,000 to pay immediately, so they're garnishing her wages. Basically, they're going to be taking a percentage of any money she earns until she pays the debt in full. Attorney Reynolds told me this is probably going to take her years, possibly a decade or more, which means that every day for the next 10 years, she's going to have to remember the consequences of her actions. He also told me she could try to file for bankruptcy to avoid paying, but that these kinds of debts for intentional damages generally can't be eliminated in bankruptcy, so basically, she's stuck with this. What happened next was almost poetic, in a certain sense. Once the verdict came out and the formal retractions were sent to everyone, the narrative in town changed completely. People started understanding that Heather had been lying the whole time, and she became a social pariah. People in town stopped talking to her. Local businesses basically banned her after she started causing dramatic scenes. Her own parents, who had defended her so fiercely, finally had to face the reality that their daughter had lied about everything. And from what I heard through third parties, her relationship with them is also super tense now. Heather ended up moving to another city about 2 hours away because she simply couldn't stand to keep living in the town where everyone knew what she had done. My business recovered completely. Vincent, my important client, called me personally after the verdict to apologize for doubting me even momentarily, and actually gave me an even bigger contract as a way to show his support. Other clients who had distanced themselves came back, some even apologizing for not giving me the benefit of the doubt from the beginning. My reputation in town not only was restored, but is possibly even better now, because people saw that I was willing to fight for the truth and defend myself legally instead of just accepting being defamed. Charlotte and I are stronger than ever. This horrible experience somehow brought us closer together, proving we can face anything together. She never doubted me for even a second, and I'm never going to forget that. Her parents have tried to contact her a couple of times in the past few weeks, leaving messages saying they now see we were right, that they regret not believing her from the beginning. Charlotte hasn't responded yet. She says she needs more time to process everything and decide if she wants to have any kind of relationship with them in the future. I completely support her in whatever she decides. The other day, Charlotte and I were sitting on the porch having coffee, something we do every morning when the weather's good, and she told me, "You know what? I'm proud of us for not letting them destroy us." And she's right. We could have given in to the pressure. I could have let Heather's lies ruin my reputation permanently. Charlotte could have doubted me under all that family manipulation. But we didn't. We fought. We used the legal system appropriately, and we won. It wasn't easy. It cost us a lot of money in lawyers even after Heather was ordered to pay our legal costs, because those reimbursements take time. It cost us many sleepless nights, many difficult conversations. But in the end, it was worth every second of stress, because now we can live our lives without that shadow of lies hanging over us. Do I feel any pity for Heather? Truth is, a little bit, because it's clear she has serious issues and probably needs professional help. But at the same time, she made conscious decisions to try to destroy my life, my marriage, my business, all out of spite or jealousy or whatever was going on in her sick head. Actions have consequences, and she's living hers. Sometimes it still surprises me that someone can be so malicious, so willing to ruin other people's lives just to satisfy their own ego or revenge or whatever. But I guess that's how toxic people are. They don't think about the consequences of their actions until it's too late. If there's anything I learned from all this, is that you should never underestimate the damage a toxic person can do, and that sometimes the only way to stop them is to confront them directly and legally. I also learned that toxic people eventually destroy themselves because their lies and manipulations eventually get exposed. And I learned that having a partner who supports you unconditionally is literally the most valuable thing you can have in life. I don't know what I would have done if Charlotte hadn't believed me from the first moment. I'd probably be divorced and ruined, but she knows me, trusts me, and that made all the difference. Now Heather is somewhere trying to rebuild her life, paying for her lies, literally and figuratively. We're still here, stronger, more united, and with our lives intact. That's our victory. And nobody can take that away from us.